Our second reading is Psalm 99. Hear what the Spirit is saying to God's people. The Lord is King. Let the peoples tremble. He sits enthroned upon the cherubim. Let the earth quake. The Lord is great in Zion. He is exalted over all the peoples. Let them praise your great and awesome name. Holy is God. Mighty King, lover of justice, you have established equity. You have executed justice and righteousness in Jacob. Extol the Lord our God. Worship at God's footstool. Holy is the Lord. Moses and Aaron were among God's priests. Samuel was also among those who called on God's name. They cried to the Lord, and he answered them. God spoke to them in a pillar of cloud. They kept God's decrees and the statutes that God gave them. O Lord our God, you answered them. You were a forgiving God to them, but an avenger of their wrongdoings. Extol the Lord our God and worship at God's holy mountain, for the Lord our God is holy. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Please pray with me. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever. Amen. Well, we've come to the final tracks on our summer playlist, our 3-week tour of the book of Psalms, the soundtrack of the Bible. And like any good album, there's an arc to it. There's a movement, there's a kind of directionality, a trajectory to the book of Psalms. And over the past 2 weeks, we've looked at Psalms of orientation, those Psalms of worship for when everything seems to be going right, and we've looked at Psalms of disorientation for when everything's going wrong. And this week is our final stop. We're going to look at Psalms of reorientation. So what do we mean by reorientation? Well, to get at what reorientation looks like in the book of Psalms, I think we need to think back to the broad strokes of the story of the people of Israel. So just straighten up your pocket protector for a minute, and we're just going to find our inner Bible nerd for just a second here. So let's think back to the story. Okay, so after the Exodus, you remember, the people enter the land, and for a couple hundred years, they're governed by judges. They don't have a king, unlike all the other nations around them. But then the people start to ask God to give them a king. And Samuel, who's mentioned in the psalm I just read, he tries to talk them out of it because he doesn't think that anything good can come from ever having a king. But the people insist, and so by around 1000 BC, David has become the king of a united Israel. Later on, the people come to think back on this time of King David as kind of like a golden age for Israel, a time in which they had orientation. But if you have read the Hebrew Bible, you know that this honeymoon doesn't last very long at all. I mean, even David turns out to not be all he's cracked up to be, and pretty soon we get wicked king after wicked king. In 922, Israel and Judah are divided into 2 kingdoms, and the northern kingdom of Israel falls in 722, but they fall to the Assyrians. And then in 586, the southern kingdom of Judah also falls to the Babylonians, and the scholarly elites of Judah are deported, and they're sent into exile in Babylon, hundreds of miles east of their homeland. And so this experience of Babylonian exile, it's one of the primary moments of disorientation in the story of the Hebrew Bible. And like all of the key hallmarks of what up to that point it had meant to be part of God's people, every single one of them just totally gets turned upside down. Like the land of promise, it's just a memory. Their beloved temple, the center of their worship life, is destroyed. And their proud monarchy is decimated and conquered. So then what does it mean to be the people of God when the world seems to be falling apart? That is the question of the Psalms of disorientation. But then finally in 538, the exile starts to come to an end, and the exiles start to return from Babylon back to their home in Jerusalem. Or more accurately, it's actually probably the children of the people who were originally exiled, who were born in Babylon, now returning to this homeland that they've actually never set foot in. And they have to figure out what it means to be God's people all over again as they go back to their ancestral land. And this brings me to reorientation. So the book of Psalms seems to have been compiled after the exiles returned to Jerusalem, after this long deportation ordeal was finally over. But of course, things didn't just go back to normal, because after a tremendous grief or loss like that, things don't just go back to normal, do they? After so vast a loss, there are some things that are just not the same again, and they will never be the same. You can't go back to the way things were before. And now that doesn't mean that you can't go on, but it does mean that slowly and softly you will begin to discover some kind of new normal. And for the people returning from exile, their dreams of a restored David-type monarchy, those dreams died back by the waters of Babylon. And indeed, in historical terms, things never did go back to that old normal for them. But what the people of Judah, the southern kingdom, came to find was that there was life even after political death. They came to believe that they did still have a king. In fact, that they had had one through it all, that God was their king. And this brings us to Psalm 99, which I read. A psalm written after the people returned from exile. And this psalm opens with the declaration, "The Lord is king. Let the peoples tremble. He sits enthroned upon the cherubim. Let the earth quake." So the old normal is gone. There's not going to be any kind of new King David riding in to reestablish the monarchy. And yet, this new normal is starting to sprout forth. This new reorientation is starting to emerge, that actually God is our king. And maybe the psalmist seems to wonder, maybe Samuel was right all along, that this whole kingship project was always bound to fail. Maybe our hope was never really supposed to come from a David-type king. Maybe our help instead has always come from another type of king, a king who we can now see in hindsight actually never left us all along, not even when we were weeping by the waters of Babylon. The Davidic kingship has failed, but there is exactly one king who will not fail, exactly one king who is trustworthy and faithful and just and holy and forgiving, exactly one king who loves justice and who establishes equity, the Lord. The Lord is king. And this is the trajectory of the book of Psalms. We go from Psalm 2, which is basically a celebration of David's kingship as ordained by God. And we move from that to Psalm 99, which says that even if David's reign falters and collapses, God is our one true king. That's reorientation. And so as the book of Psalms is being compiled, put together after the exile, the people putting the collection together are making an eclectic mixtape for us. They're pulling together centuries-old psalms of orientation, and they're preserving them next to more recent psalms of disorientation from the exile era, and then they're also including in the collection some even newer psalms like Psalm 99, psalms of people who have been through a calamity but who have come out the other side and can now bear witness to a God who delivered them through that. This also includes psalms like our first reading for today, 124, that says, "If it had not been the Lord who was on our side, our enemies would have swallowed us up alive, and the flood would have swept us away." Those are the words of somebody who has faced real danger and real peril, but who is now learning what it means to be a survivor. Someone who's finding a way not only to believe in life after death, but to believe in life after life. If it had not been the Lord who was on our side, I never could have made it. If it hadn't been for God, I wouldn't be standing here to testify to you today, they say. This symbol on my stole here, it's a symbol that's used by the Akan people in Ghana. It's called Gie Nyame, and it means except for God, or unless God, ... Like, unless God had been on our side, we wouldn't have made it out. So this symbol, it's like a visual summary of Psalm 124 almost. Unless God had saved us, we wouldn't be here. Except for God, it all would have been for naught. And so I wear this to remind me that in the words of the psalmist, our help is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth. So as we come to the end of this sermon series, I'm thankful that our biblical mixtape is eclectic. Because once history has happened and the new normal starts to take root, there can be a temptation to forget what it is that led to that point. There can be a temptation to just gloss over the wounds of the past, to downplay the pain, the trauma, the disorientation, the oppression, and to assimilate it all into a more tidy or comfortable narrative about progress. But this to me is exactly why the Psalms are so compelling as a collection. They're compelling one by one, but they're also compelling as a collection, and we miss that if we atomize them one by one. They're an anthology, an anthology that has a trajectory to it. Those who compiled the Psalms didn't just leave us a playlist that's only for the new normal. No, they included the old songs from the David era. They deliberately also kept the messy, unresolved, and angry songs from the exile era. They didn't clean them up for us. They also included new songs about the new normal, about the reorientation that God can bring even after the land and the monarchy and the temple have all been stripped away. They said, let's keep all the Psalms. Let's hold on to them. Let's compile them. Let's attend to them. Let's store them up like treasure. Let's preserve the witness of our ancient ancestors' experiences of God, good, bad, and ugly experiences of God, by the way, because we might need them again. We might be disoriented again in the future. And if we are, maybe singing these words again will remind us that at least we are not alone. We're never alone. Maybe singing someone else's song of reorientation can help to reorient us a little bit and stoke our little ember of faith so that we could actually start to come to believe that God actually really does deliver, that God actually really does save. It's like the words of the spiritual, I shall wear a crown, say. You say, I shall wear a crown when it's all over. I'm going to put on my robe and tell the story of how I made it over. To sing magnificent words like that is to participate in the telling of a story. It's to be swept up into something so much bigger and deeper and older and more elemental than yourself. It's to participate in a tradition of faith that goes back farther than we can fathom, and it's to float in a river of prayer and worship that stretches back farther than the eye can see and stretches forward farther than the eye can see. To sing these songs together is to be reoriented with and by a community of worship, a community that together will hold fast, even if some days your individual faith or mine might fail. talked a lot in this sermon series about Walter Brueggemann, the late biblical scholar. He has so many great insights from his very long career, but let me just share one more tidbit with you. He compares the Bible to a compost pile. Here's what he says. He says, the Bible is a compost pile that provides material for new life. I do not use this figure as an irreverent metaphor to suggest that the Bible is garbage, he says. Rather, I use it to suggest that the Bible itself is not the actual place of new growth. Rather, our present life, when we undertake new growth, is often inadequate, arid, or even barren, and it needs to be enriched. And for that enrichment, we go back to the deposits of old growth that have been discarded, but that continue to ferment and may contain resources for a new way of life. So like a compost pile, the Bible is that out of which something new can grow. The focus isn't on the compost pile itself. The focus is on what newness might come out of it. The Psalms contain the layers of the discarded deposits, the centuries of wisdom and experience, the time-tested ferment of real and unfiltered emotions that can enrich our soil and make newness possible. So as we go about our summers, let's keep this playlist on repeat. Let's see what newness might grow as we sing the old songs. Let's keep them close to our hearts, because I have a feeling we're going to be needing them again.